so far we've been watching the situation taking place on the world stage. It seems like things are happening each day. More things are happening each day than a whole year, it seems, and especially when it comes to West Asia. What's your view on what's on the situation developing in Yemen with Trump and his seemingly foreshadowing of a larger campaign?
Well, it's great to be here. I have to say, it's nice that we're able to get these topics out there and that we can encourage more people to learn the truth about what's happening on the ground. If I start off on Yemen, I mean, just the other day, we've had yet another American attack they claim to be bombing the military infrastructure. But just like the Zionists in Gaza, they're actually bombing innocent civilians. They're bombing residential areas. It's all been civilian casualties and not military casualties. So while they're claiming to be attacking the missile defense infrastructure, I don't agree with it, obviously, for 1 second. I can understand if they're preparing for a prolonged war against Yemen. Yeah. The first thing to do is take out the anti-aircraft missiles in order to give them free rein to be able to bomb at will. Now, they were using some of their aircraft carriers, but they're also joined by the British. So if you remember the illegal war in Iraq, you had the British and the Americans involved in that illegal war that murdered like over 1 million people. 600,000 civilians died in Iraq because of the siege and the sanctions that were put on before 2003, before the attack on Iraq proper, shock and awe and boots on the ground. So I don't know whether or not we're going to see something similar in Yemen. I hope not, but it's the British and the Americans, the axis of evil, the axis of the empire. You have the old colonial rump of the British Empire, and you have like the world's superpower, really. I mean, no one spends as much money on weapons as the Americans. Nobody spends as much money on the military-industrial complex. So you've got you've got, I don't know, is it 860 billion or something? It's a huge amount. And they're bombing. Somebody said like America's probably, maybe outside of China, it's maybe number 2 economically in the world, and like Yemen's last. Yemen's been involved in a civil war, which has been backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates on behalf of America and on behalf of Zionism. So you had the Ansarallah movement rising up to remove Hadi, I think it was. He was the dictator. He then fled to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to his financial backers, and then Saudi Arabia and the UAE, using mercenaries as well as their own troops, then kind of partitioned Yemen and led a prolonged campaign against the Ansarallah revolution in Yemen. So Yemen, to me, is following international law. So like the Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Convention against genocide and stuff, there is a moral and a political imperative on states, state actors, organizations, and indeed individuals to prevent genocide. So what you're witnessing in Gaza is a genocide by the Zionist entity upon the people of Palestine, and there is a moral imperative that people try to prevent that. So the way the Yemenis have tried to prevent it is by closing off the Arabian Sea in order to choke fuel and armaments and all the goods that are necessary for the Zionist entity to continue its ethnic genocide, ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people in Gaza and now the West Bank. So they've been targeting ships that have been bringing military aid to Israel. So in my opinion, under international law, they are following international law, whereas America and Britain and Germany, the people who are arming, financing and bombing the genocide of the Zionist entity in Gaza, are all working outside of the law and outside of international law, and should be brought before the Hague and charged in front of the International Criminal Court with crimes against humanity. And we know that they already have out a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu and also Yoav Gallant, who was the war minister in the Israeli cabinet. And the guy, Merz, I think it is, who's going to be the new Chancellor of Germany, apparently he's going to be inviting Netanyahu to Germany. So I don't know what role Lausanne has played in him getting elected and that new coalition that they have in Germany. But if the first person he's going to invite on an official visit to Germany is someone who has an international criminal court warrant out for his arrest, and when you think of the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War, it was the Nazis who were brought in front of the criminal court then. It was the Nazis who went to jail, and I don't know whether or not any of them were executed for their part that they played in murdering 27 million Russians in the Holocaust, in targeting socialists and communists and people who had like Down syndrome. So anyone who wasn't part of the superior master Aryan race, which I see mirrored through Zionism. Zionism, the political ideology that uses Judaism as the chosen people. God gave them Palestine. God, I assume, also gave them greater Israel, and they're willing to murder as many people as it takes to promote that attack upon basically their neighbors. If Israel didn't exist, Yemen wouldn't be trying to prevent the genocide in Gaza and ongoing now in the West Bank. So America and Britain are involved in these. They'll call them sorties. You know, they're just bombing people in tents because they bomb Bedouins, they bomb the villages, they bomb the cities, they bomb Sana'a, the capital. Now, part of it is this collective punishment against the Yemeni people in order to try, because they've had a siege for like 10 years or longer, economic, trying to force regime change. And as part of that, they're trying to get the people to turn against the administration, the way they did in Syria. Some people, I was surprised, were glad to see Assad go, some Syrians that I know personally. But they said to me, well, with him gone, maybe they'll lift the sanctions and maybe we'll have, a better economic foothold going forward. So we'll go on to Syria in a wee minute or two, but just specifically talking about Yemen and what's happening there, and the fact that the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Cyprus were all involved in allowing their territorial waters or possibly American bases to attack Yemen. So you have this collaborative effort. It's Britain and America, but they're using other assets in the region. There are 800 American bases across the globe. I mean, you can only look at that as an imperial footprint wherever they are across the world. And then they use these bases. And I'm convinced they're trying to get Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and anybody else into a coalition of the willing. Now, apparently the Yemenis retaliated. And in 48 hours, they've sent 24 cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and associated drones and attacked the USS, the United States ship Truman, one of their aircraft carriers. So, I mean, they're obviously saying straight away, don't think you can come and bomb us, and there's no accountability. And when you see every Friday in Sana'a and the other cities and towns and villages across Yemen, 1 million people coming out calling for an end to the genocide in Gaza, they are supporting the actions of the Ansarallah government and the Ansarallah military machine in trying to prevent genocide and trying to protect the innocent. And by extension, it's an anti-imperialist military campaign against the white European Anglo-Saxon footprint in Israel. I've read stuff that says 95% of the people in Israel are not Semite, because the majority of Jewish people in Europe who then migrated to as carpetbaggers and carpetbaggers to Palestine, they're Russian, they're Polish, they're French, they're British, they're North American, Canadian, Australian. They all converted, I think, as Ashkenazis. This was a Jewish sect in Europe which converted people to Judaism, which I don't have an issue with, but they're not Semites. They're not from the land of Sham. They're not, they weren't born in the region. They have no ancestral connection to the region. They are converts to Judaism.
Yeah.
So they can't claim to have anything other. I mean, they don't even have a biblical claim to what they're doing. If you're born in Russia, you're Russian. If you
Yeah.
convert to Judaism, or your parents or grandparents converted to Judaism, you're a Russian Jew, you're a Polish Jew, you're an American Jew. You know, it's like saying somehow as a Catholic I have some connection to Jerusalem. That would allow me
Yeah.
as a Christian to go and take over someone's home and say, well, Christ walked these streets. I'm a Christian. This
Yeah.
should be a Christian city. Let's bring back the crusade. This is the type of mentality these people have. So the Yemenis are standing up against American, British, and by extension, Zionist hegemony within the region. Everything that happens in West Asia, every murder, every death, every killing, the destructions of towns, villages, hospitals, schools, water treatment factories. Israel is a cancer in the body host of West Asia. And like any disease, if it's not treated, it will possibly kill the host. And that's what you're seeing. If Israel didn't exist, I personally don't believe it has any right to exist. It was born through terrorism, it exists through terrorism, and it expands through terrorism. And the sooner people actually get that message into their heads and realize it's a rogue regime, it's a terrorist state, it's using religion as a smokescreen for the political ideology of Zionism. So just in conclusion, and to tie in like Yemen with Syria, the destruction of Syria is at the behest of the Zionists in collaboration with the Turks and the Americans. And when you think of the white helmets, that's MI6 and your man John Le Mesurier who set them up. So you've got the British, the Americans, the Turks, and the Israelis now all on the ground. Syria's been balkanized, and you also have Saudi Arabia, who has paid for a lot of the mercenaries. 50% of these people in Syria aren't even Syrian. They're Uyghurs, they're Turkestan, they're from the Caucasus. They're just thugs, mercenaries, rapists, and murderers who, because they're not held to account, Gerard, they can just sweep across Iraq, they can sweep across Syria, they can go into Lebanon. They're like a group that sits up on the shelf, like the Muslim Brotherhood. And whenever Western machinations come to the fore, they lift them down, they dust them off. The Kurds are the same. The Kurds are there, they lift them down, they arm them, they send them into the battle, they send them into the front, and they let them get on with things. So Syria's been balkanized. We're watching the genocide of the Alawites. No one's coming to the raid. It's not like the lie in Syria that NATO used, that you had to protect the civilian population. You'll have a no-fly zone. You've got the Zionist state still bombing civilians and people in Damascus. You've got them threatening anybody armed coming into 1/3 of Syria that they now occupy, that would like basically be a starter for a campaign against them. And then if we just quickly go to Trump's the glue between all this. Trump, I had a lot of hope in Trump when he came along. He said it would end the war in Ukraine. We've got a de facto ceasefire in Gaza, but they're still murdering people every day. There's still the occupation. They haven't moved on to the second stage. There's no intention of leaving Gaza, and Trump seems more than happy with that. I don't know what his plans are about still continuing to try and remove forcibly or otherwise the people from Gaza. But like Trump's attack on Yemen, I don't know if he's trying to send a message as he's a businessman. We'll bomb the people and then we'll tell them, this is going to continue unless you bow the knee, unless you do what we're told. But they bombed Yemen for 10 years and they're not any further along. And the Yemenis people are going to stand up against them. So what Trump does next is something that we'll have to wait and see. But it doesn't augur well. And just finally, I had a closed session of the United Nations Security Council. Closed session means no press, nobody outside who's not invited. And then you get the bombing in Yemen. What are their plans for Iran? What was talked about in that room? Who's this coalition of the willing they're talking about going forward? And, Iran doesn't have a nuclear capability. And so long as it doesn't have that, it's open to conventional attack from the Americans, the Zionists, and increasingly, potentially the Europeans.
Thanks, for it's always an education listening to you, man, honestly. So yesterday, we witnessed what happened in Yemen. Just before we conclude with Yemen and stuff, Pete Hegseth, the Minister of Defense or Defense Minister in the US, came out and said that they were actually targeting leaders of Ansar Allah. Now, I don't know if any truth to that, but the health ministry in Yemen came out and said that they were residential centres that were struck, and it was overwhelmingly civilians who were killed. I don't know if there's any more to come out about any leaders being targeted or anything. So.
Gerard, I wouldn't be surprised, because if they're copying Azana's copybook, textbook, that's what they do. They use phones, tracking technology. They use assets on the ground to physically identify where people are. Then they call in an airstrike and stuff, and then they try and take people out. But I mean, they're claiming it's infrastructure. They're claiming they're going for the leaders. But sure, Hezbollah and Hamas have proved time and time again, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. So seeing we're chatting away here and seeing we're having a wee discussion, I know you're interested in what's happening on the Ukraine at the minute, and also updates on activists in Europe. So you want to give us an update on Ukraine and then move on to what's happening for activists in Europe?
100% fast. So it kind of all ties in. Well, it does all tie in geopolitically. It's all part of the one thing, you know, this imperialist structure, the hegemonic structure around the world. But when we come to Ukraine, you know, there's a narrative that's been put out before, even before Maidan. There was a narrative being spun, and it was one that Russia was the issue. Russia was the problem. Russia needed to be contained. Now, the containment strategy, as you know, was something that they had developed over the span of, 40 years, 50 years. And it's the same pretty much with what you were saying in Syria with Iran. There's a containment strategy there, and maybe even more, you know, with their machinations of wanting to go in, hit nuclear facilities or whatnot. But Ukraine, what the Europeans have done, what the foremost imperialist powers have done, is they've sacrificed generations of normal working class Ukrainians to a meat grinder. And they tell us that Russia is fond of meat grinder tactics or strategies, or, you know, it's a load of cobwobble. When you actually look at the reality of the situation, it's young working class men and women who are being slaughtered. And that's why I would probably agree with Trump that yes, it does need to stop. But it's funny how when it comes to Ukraine or places where they have interests in, how they're willing to, you know, give space and leeway for the fighting to continue, for weapons to continue to flow, for this, that, and the other. But when it comes to anti-imperialist movements, or it comes to revolutionary movements in general, they're on it. They're hitting their leaderships. They're cutting down groups. They're striking infrastructure. They're striking the civilian populace. You know, it was the same in Lebanon, where they were striking civilian centers like mad. Was it the Dahia doctrine, or yeah, something. And they were striking civilian centers, and that was just to cause pure panic and pure anger amongst the population, to sow division and whatnot. You know, divide and conquer. But the situation in Ukraine at the minute, in Kursk, you have a closing pocket, basically of a certain amount of time before the situation is dire for whoever's left. They were told, the soldiers on the ground were told this nearly a month, 2 months ago. General Syrsky had told Zelensky, now this is reportedly, had told Zelensky that they needed to pull out. There was no real strategic value in them sitting holding that piece of land, because they knew that President Putin wouldn't have allowed for negotiations to go ahead while Kursk was still in the hands of the Ukrainians and the foreign mercenaries, and I would dare say NATO soldiers who were on the ground as well. You have as well, when they entered Kursk, they went to homes of civilians, communities, local communities, and there's footage, video, and documented evidence of this. And they took these people away. And this was mentioned in President Putin's speech just the other day when he was speaking with Alexander Lukashenko. He said that those people need to be brought before the courts. You know, he doesn't want to see death. He doesn't want to see people being slaughtered. He said to them, if you give up now, you surrender now, then you'll be looked look down favourably upon. We will not, they're not looking to completely wipe out all these people. I believe that Russia wants to bring this to an end, but they're looking at it and saying that Europe is sitting in the background talking about putting troops here, troops there. They're even speaking about putting Irish troops in Ukraine. Now, this is the Irish working class, or the Irish comprador political class, who are willing to send the Irish working class to go and fight, to go and protect a piece of land that will probably more than likely end up as a flashpoint on the world stage. It's a sign of the times, and in my mind, it's also a sign of the crisis of capitalism. We're watching the crackdowns, people covering situations from Palestine to Ukraine to Yemen to Sudan. No matter what you're covering, if you have a dissenting voice or a narrative that doesn't chime with the narrative of the establishment, it seems that they have it out for you, and yes, I agree with you. Smaller content creators or people that do this type of work, are less likely to be hit by this type of thing. But we're seeing now it's starting to morph into something more. We can talk about shadow banning on social media and the whole lot of that. But even just with the raids on activists' homes, the raids on journalists being locked up, Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, and we had in the US, Mahmoud Khalil from Columbia University. This, in my mind, is a symptom of the crisis, the wider crisis of global capitalism, as much as it is to do with the geopolitical situation. It's all interconnected. And I think, this work more than ever is invaluable. Because not only do I learn, you learn, and everyone else learns, but together we start to build a better picture of the situation, and we're able to analyze our own situation in our own context, and be able to intertwine that with our own struggle at home. I can only see things getting worse with the clampdowns and stuff as things progress. It doesn't matter if you're covering Ukraine, it doesn't matter if you're covering Palestine. If you're a dissenting voice, you're basically frowned upon. It's a no-go. But I will come back to Kursk again. Yes, so those people, they're sitting there now. They're being told to hold that land at all costs. Hold that land at all costs, even though they're being pushed back by Russian forces. The Russian forces bypassed a huge contingent of Ukrainians in Sucha. They used a pipeline to go underneath the soldiers, and they came up in the middle of the formations and absolutely wrecked the Ukrainian formations in Sucha. They had to pull out, and now they're on the outskirts. They're still being told, hold that at all costs. It's very reminiscent of the orders that Hitler gave back in World War II. Hold at all costs. At all costs, do not give up the land. Something that you've said, and we spoke about this being very reminiscent of the 1930s. I would have to agree. You look at the bubble, the stock bubble, AI stock bubble, just like in the 1930s before the Great Depression, you had the real estate bubble. You had the tariffs. Trump is now put on tariffs, just like in 1930 you had a tariff that was put out that a lot of economic analysts will say was the catalyst to the Great Depression. So it is very reminiscent of the 1930s. We're in a historic time at this minute. I see Ukraine possibly there being peace for a period, but the way the British and the Europeans are speaking, it to me doesn't seem like they're forecasting peace for a very long time. You had the British Chief of Staff, the British military, come out not too long ago and said that they need to triple their lethality and they need to double their force size. This, along with Sky News pundits, the deep state pundits, MI5, MI6, they're on and they're speaking about, how there's going to be a challenge in the future, 2027, 2030, we're going to have to get our troops, we're going to have to get things organized. They're talking about beefing up their armies with drones and machines and AI, and whether they're going to be able to do that or not, that's a totally different question. But they don't you know, I can understand where Putin's coming from when he says that what about this and what about that, and he's not willing to just jump into negotiations just because on the whim of Trump, because Trump's decided to be friends all of a sudden, you know. President Putin's a pragmatist, but he's a realist. And though I don't agree with everything he says or his politics, and don't agree with everything he says or does, I think he's done right here. I think the people in the Donbass were being targeted for what, after Maidan, you had the Ukrainian military go into Mariupol, Odessa. You had them they were going to go to Crimea, and the people were slaughtered. Trade union buildings in Odessa, pregnant woman raped and killed in the buildings. Was it 32 people killed? People being shot as they were trying to climb out windows. You had Mariupol, the Ukrainian military being deployed on the streets. They were shooting people on the streets, and you never ever hear this from the pundits when they speak of Ukraine. All we ever really hear is about how Russia invaded Crimea. You know, there's no context to it. Why did Russia invade Crimea? Well, the Russian-speaking population witnessed a slaughter in the trade union buildings. They witnessed what happened to Mariupol and other places. The Russians weren't ready to let that happen to the Russian-speaking population in Crimea, as well as the Black Sea Fleet and Russia had agreements, long-standing agreements that would allow for soldiers to be based on Crimea. So they were there legally. They were there. That wasn't, you know, that's a fact. They were there legally. But I believe what they done was right to protect the population. A lot of people say it's imperialist ambitions. Russia has imperialist ambitions. They want to take over Europe. They want to push right into Europe. Take Poland. Take France. Take this. I totally disagree. When I look at the geopolitical situation and the overall picture, it's not one of imperialist ambitions for me, in my eyes anyway. You know, if someone was to come along and give me some information that will change my mind, I'm open to have my mind changed. But the way it stands, no, the only imperialist ambitions I see is from the US. Even though Donald Trump's changed his dynamic, it's still imperialism. The UK, Europe, it's just going to get worse, in my opinion, as we go on. The same with the crackdowns on activists and journalists, unfortunately.
Well, that's pretty good, mate. Actually, we're giving ourselves half an hour, so we're another few wee minutes. I'm just going to tie two things in, and then I'll let you round it up.
Yeah.
One of them is I read in Kursk that there are over 30 NATO officers. So we're probably talking about a couple of generals here, because there's been generals that have been killed before in the Ukraine. They've been in the hotels and stuff. I think the Russians hit some underground bunker with a bunker buster about maybe 12 months ago, and they took out. I think it was a French general or something. So, I mean, these people, it's a NATO-led war, NATO using the Ukrainians. I think they're in Kursk because you're right, there won't be a ceasefire so long as they're there. But also, I think on some level, they thought that they could bring pressure on the Russians in the negotiations.